Welcome back, ladies and gentlemen, to Thursday's Theology. My name is Pastor Jeff, and I am your host. And today we are going to be talking about the theology of the best character in the entire Marvel Cinematic Universe, Captain America. For those of you who don't know, Captain America is my absolute favorite character of all time. The reason being is that I studied World War II in both undergrad and graduate school, and his character symbolizes so much of what was going on in the United States during the 1940s. All that to say, you are probably going to hear me gush over Cap in this episode, but that's okay. So the question is, how does Captain America's story fit in with theology? Now that is an excellent question. So what we see going on in Cap's story is the dangers of placing your faith in something other than God. Again, Captain America is not an outspoken Christian, so the conclusions I'm drawing are just what I've noticed and what I can pick up on. So what we see in Cap's story is that during the 1940s and World War II, his faith is placed in the government of the United States. This faith is somewhat justified because the US was fighting to rid the world of fascism, or so Captain America thought. So throughout Cap's storyline, we can see how disillusioned he becomes with the US government and what they stand for. After the first movie, when Captain America is rescued from being under ice for nearly 70 years, he wakes up to a world that is far more complicated than when he left. He begins to learn about American history from World War II on, and he sees some of the shady things that have happened. In fact, when he joins S.H.I.E.L.D. to fight for the government once again, you can tell that he does so with his guard up, not really trusting the motives of Nick Fury. That being said, he struggles to find the faith he once had as things begin to devolve. During Civil War, we see Cap's story take an even greater turn towards the worse because he ends up refusing to sign the Sokovia Accords and is branded an outlaw. It is at this moment that he no longer wants to fight for the government he once believed in, especially because it is that same government that has demonized his best friend, Bucky Barnes. Now, it is not explicitly stated in the Marvel Cinematic Universe, but in the comics, Captain America rips the star off of his chest and gives up the shield and becomes a character known as the Nomad. He is a man without a nation, wandering around trying to right the wrongs he sees. Anyway, the point being is that through Cap's story arc, we can see that he had placed so much of his faith in his government just to be disappointed and eventually disillusioned. So how does this relate to the Bible? Another excellent question. So throughout the New Testament, we see some people known as Zealots. Now, Zealots were a group of Jewish nationalists that wanted to overthrow Rome and restore Israel to its place of prominence in Judea. They were willing to use any means necessary in order to rid Jerusalem of the Roman oppressors. One of the disciples that Jesus calls to follow him is a man named Simon, who they called the Zealot. Now, Simon was a member of this group of nationalists and saw Rome as the ultimate threat to Jewish peace. The Zealots placed their faith in their own strength and identity as Jews. They were on fire for their cause and wanted everyone to know it. Simon wanted Jesus to be the military leader that would kick Rome out of Jerusalem. But Jesus spoke of loving your enemies, praying for them, and taking care of them. These were not words of a military leader, but an oppressed rabbi who had given up the fight. So this is a perennial problem with Jesus. He never is quite what we want him to be. We want him to be our avenger, pun intended. We want him to be our military leader. We want him to be the one who will rain down hellfire on our enemies. But he doesn't quite fit the mold we want him to. Whenever we place our faith in the idea of Jesus instead of Jesus himself, then we are setting ourselves up for a lifetime of disappointment. Jesus will never fit into the boxes of our own design. So, much like Captain America, we must be careful of who or what we place our faith in, because if it is anything other than the Triune God, then we are ultimately going to become disillusioned with whatever is our idol. Captain America's story is one of misplaced faith. What makes his character so compelling is that he continues to live by his own moral standard, which was forged during World War II, even when his nation has abandoned morality. I love Captain America. I love his idealism, but I must also admit that he suffers from an over-idealism of the American promise. I hope that we can all use his story as a cautionary tale. And that, ladies and gentlemen, is how the story of Captain America reflects a theology of misplaced faith. So thanks again for joining me this week for this week's episode of Thursday's Theology. My name is Pastor Jeff, and I'm your host. And remember, theology doesn't always have to be difficult. It is simply the study of who God is. Take care. We'll see you next week.